right, so my name is Kathleen Davenport. I'm a business consultant with BWC. I've been with BWC for nearly 30 years. In July, I'll be 30 years. So most of my adult career I've spent at the Bureau of Workers' Compensation. I spent a couple years in our claims department, probably know enough about those to be dangerous, and then spent the majority of my time in the Employer Services Division, most of it as a business consultant. So I work with local trade association, chambers, with workers' compensation issues, and I wanted to give a more general overview and maybe connect some of the dots with our Division of Safety and Hygiene and some of the other things that we do, namely claims management and the employer services. So we're going to start out the day with some history, fun facts, and statistics. Now, don't judge me on my idea of fun when we get to the fun facts, but we'll talk about some BWC programs and rebates that are available to employers. Our favorite topic about grants. We'll talk about, in general context, of what Will's Division of Safety and Hygiene handles, and then we'll just kind of give some miscellaneous updates and questions. So that's where we're kind of headed today. Now, I know I run a little bit of a risk when I start out a presentation at 8:30 in the morning saying, beginning in 1911, but a little bit of history about the Bureau of Workers' Compensation is that we began in 1911, so we're over 100 years old, and we became part of the Ohio Constitution in 1912. Does anybody know what was going on in our history about that time? Nobody's up on their history, So Will, I'm going to tap into Will's a safety professional. There was a pretty catastrophic event that happened in 1911. The Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. It was a big fire that happened in Manhattan. It killed 176 individuals. And at that time, most states did not have any workers' compensation laws on the books. But that kind of sparked all the states to kind of start looking at workers' compensation, workman's compensation, as they called it back then, and started enacting laws related to workplace injuries and how individuals would be treated. So, way back then, without laws in place, what would happen when there was workplace injuries is that the injured worker or the injured employee would try to sue the company. Sometimes they were not founded as well, the injuries, but it would become very litigious. And what would happen is some businesses would go out of business because they would have to spend money trying to fight workers' compensation issues. So way back then, in 1911, 1912, the trade-off between having workers' compensation system to be an exclusive remedy, meaning if you're injured at work, the injured worker is entitled to benefits under the workers' compensation law, but that's the extent of it. So they're entitled to, at times many benefits under the workers' compensation system, but they cannot sue unless there's an intentional tort outside of the workers' compensation system. The trade-off with that is a no-fault system. So we don't try to find who was at fault. Maybe it was a situation where you had trained an individual multiple times on a particular task. They failed to follow company policy and they were injured. With workers' compensation, it is a no-fault system. So we look at injuries that are compensable, that are physical in nature, and or an occupational disease such as the carpal tunnel or asbestosis, would be examples of occupational disease. But once they're determined to have a workplace injury, the benefits that they are entitled to, the injured workers, are that's defined, in our Ohio revised codes and our Ohio administrative codes. And so that's kind of how the system works, kind of in a nutshell. There's two separate agencies. Will and I both work for the Bureau of Workers' Compensation, and our job, our claims department's job, is to be the first, if you're a state-funded employer, to make the initial decisions on claims, and then ultimately make any legal decisions after that that affect things like benefits. You will also have a managed care organization that handles the medical aspect of a claim. They are paid for by BWC and as part of your premium, but they handle all of the odds and ends related to the medical. So they are approving physical therapies, they're approving surgeries, they're paying the doctor. So they're an arm of the BWC. But the other agency is the Industrial Commission. When a claim is disputed, then it will go to the Industrial Commission and they will make the decisions, final decision, based on the evidence. Sometimes when it goes to the Industrial Commission, they're reviewing the same evidence that we reviewed at BWC. Sometimes there's additional evidence that's submitted. So that's, the initial decision, but ultimately there could be other decisions that go on during the claim. So a claim is allowed for specific conditions. If I was up here and I tripped on a garbage can as I was walking out, that would be compensable because it was in the course of and rising out of employment. That's one of the things that we look for. So it would be compensable. But let's say it was determined I sprained my knee as a result of that. So that initial sprain of the knee is allowed in the claim. All the medical bills are only related to the sprain of the knee. But things can happen subsequently, like I go to the doctor and eventually get an MRI and find out it's not a sprain, it is a torn meniscus. And so then that torn meniscus would have to be reviewed and determined if that was in fact part of the claim. So the Industrial Commission and BWC, we're looking at all of those types of issues, what should be allowed in claims, whether or not compensation is payable. And so that's what the two agencies do. We're governed by an 11-member board with representatives from all different sectors, from labor and self-insured employers, and we have an actuary on there, so a whole bunch of different members that make up our board that help us make BWC policy. And we have 11 different service offices. Will mentioned a couple of them that are here in the local vicinity. The closest is our Dayton office, which is over off Benchwood Wise. Cincinnati and Columbus are pretty close as well. The 11 different service offices used to have a lot more foot traffic and a lot more meaning to be local. Now, a lot of things, most things with workers' compensation claims are done online, over the phone, et cetera. So having local offices is nice and it's beneficial, especially for employers who are trying to get to safety and hygiene classes. But you might have a claim that's actually being handled by a representative in our Columbus office or Canton office or Cleveland. But we do have 11 different offices throughout the state. Kind of our facts in regards to the number of employers, and I've been here nearly 30 years, and this number really hasn't changed all that much. We say around 250,000 employers in the state, most of which are private employers. There are some public employers, so city, counties, school systems are considered a public employer. We do have some state agency, like the Bureau of Workers' Compensation or Department of Administrative Services, state universities, state hospitals fall under the state category. We have over 1,000 that are self-insured, and what that means is those employers have been granted the privilege of self-insurance, and I mentioned this before, that they actually make the initial determinations on claims, and they have to, in fact, make their decisions based on the Ohio law, so they're making decisions hopefully the same way we are making decisions. If there's that dispute between a self-insured employer and their injured worker, then it still goes to the Industrial Commission for final determination. And then we have some specialty black lung and marine fund employers as well. The claims has, they dramatically have shifted over the last couple of years. We have about 70,000 claims last policy year that we adjudicated. These are new claims coming into our system, so 70,000 allowed claims. This number back in 2010 was about 210,000. So the numbers of claims have significantly dropped. I think that goes back to employers that are doing some of the right things in their workplaces that are making them safer. Some of those employers might have went to self-insurance from the state fund, might have accounted for some of them. But if you look at these numbers, these statistics, it's about 86% of our claims are medical only, which are the simple injuries that, like I mentioned, if I don't lose time off work, if I'm able to go back to work with my trip and fall, then that's considered a medical only. And most of those are inexpensive claims. They get back to work pretty quickly, within the first 7 days of the injury. The claim is probably a couple medical doctor visits, and then that claim is resolved. The lost time claims tend to be a little more expensive because those people actually lose time off work, and they're entitled to benefits if they've lost time off work if they're not paid by the employer. So the lost time claims, they're usually longer. They have a longer tail. We have claims from the 1950s that we're still paying on in the forms of permanent total disability, because there are cases that injured workers are not able to at all return to the workforce for the duration of their employment. And death claims, obviously, persons injured in the course of, or dies as a result of an injury in the course of employment. We had 154 of those, last year. And, you hear sometimes those on the news, sometimes you don't hear about them. And I'll have a little statistic on that here in a minute. And then, we do disallow or claims are dismissed. A dismissed claim is when the injured worker withdraws their claim from BWC. So claims are disallowed, meaning they didn't meet the burden of it being a compensable claim happening in the course of an arising out of employment, or maybe it's a not Ohio jurisdiction claim. So that's kind of where we stand as far as new claims. The bottom statistics there look at what we have in our system as open claims, and I talked about we have claims that have some of them have very long tails in a particular claim, but those are the ones that are active, open, that didn't have, those include the ones that happened last year, but also includes the other ones that we are managing on a day-to-day basis. Here's a breakdown of some of the medical benefits and some of the types of compensation that injured workers are entitled to. Obviously, any medical treatment that resulted from that injury is covered at 100% by BWC. The different compensation benefits, you can see permanent total. We talked about that a little bit when somebody's permanently totally disabled. Temporary total is the most common type of compensation. It is just what it says. If that person is temporarily, totally disabled, let's say they just had surgery or they're just not able to perform their work, we have settlement, death. Percentage of permanent partial is when a person, assuming they're 100% prior to their injury, and then now they're only 95% because they have some permanent impairment, they get a benefit based on that 5% impairment or whatever that percentage is determined to be. And so that's out there. Permanent partial is a little bit different. It is as a result of an amputation or what is determined as ankylosis, which is the loss of use. So, an amputation, let's say of the thumb, obviously the thumb is no longer a part of your hand, but ankylosis would be it's still attached, but you're not able to use it, it's not function. And then some other types of disability, wage loss, et cetera. So most of the compensation paid is that temporary total compensation, but others as well. So I talked about the loss of the thumb. How much do you think a thumb is worth? I don't think anybody could pay me to lose my thumb, but any?
$600 a week? I don't know, what do you, monthly?
$40 for my, all right. A thumb is worth $68,940. And this schedule changes, each year. But if somebody loses their thumb, that's the additional compensation that they would be paid for under the workers' compensation law. So don't cut your thumb off. And then obviously by body part, that is, different for each body part. With fingers, it's depending on where the amputation is, at what joint, whole finger versus a third or 2/3 of the finger. So, each body part is worth a little bit different. Hopefully, you don't have to deal with this, hopefully, in your workforce, but this is something that's covered under workers' compensation. They receive their benefits, but obviously claims costs affect rates, and we'll talk about that here in a few minutes.
Is that a total amount?
That is a total amount. It's a little bit complicated. They pay it out as a weekly benefit, but that is, the maximum. A lot of times by the time they're adjudicated, they're just paid out in a lump sum, but that's the amount that they would eventually receive, over the course of the number of weeks that's listed. What was that? Well, you get that, but you also could get temporary total compensation on top of that and permanent total disability, on top of that. So that is just for the amputation part of the benefit. So we talked about fatalities before. Unfortunately, we do have to deal with these on a regular basis, and construction is heavy with as far, and I think we can kind of imagine why that might be, but transportation's out there and others as well. So people can be killed in the course of their employment in any industry. So hopefully your safety processes are in place that are preventing any injuries, but death benefits, in particular, dealing with a surviving spouse in a lot of cases, dependent children, and they're entitled to funeral benefits in addition to that as well as part of a death claim. Hopefully none of you will have to deal with that. So now let's switch gears a little bit and let's talk a little bit about rate making and how we calculate the rates. With workers' compensation, there are basically three things that go into what your rates are. The first is your class code. Class code is your pursuit of industry. That's what you do. When you file your initial application, you give us a description of what you do. You're a plumber. You're a school. You're a widget manufacturer. So you give descriptions on what you do, and we put you in the proper class code, what we think is the proper class code. Sometimes your pursuit changes. You go in, you start your business, you're a plumbing company. And then you find out, oh, well, I want to start hiring electricians. And maybe that part of the business is a little more lucrative, and maybe you stop doing plumbing. It's important to keep BWC abreast on changes in your business operation, because if you started as a plumber and we classified you as a plumber, until either we do an audit and find out there's other parts of the operation, we'll keep you as a plumber. Or you call us and let us know that your operation is changing. So when you get this information, you get it twice a year. Employers look at this. We send out each year at the beginning, right before the beginning of the policy year, an EAP was an estimated annual premium notice that has your descriptions on there. And so that you'll see it there. And then we have what we call a true-up process, where you report your actual payroll after the end of the year. Those are listed there. So those are times to be looking at that and making sure that's the correct classification. Yes?
I have a question on that class code. So how often do you change your class code or add additional class codes to break down that class code?
How often does BWC change?
Yeah.
So we use National Council of Compensation Insurance, NCCI, which is kind of the national standard. There's a big old scopes book that details, descriptions, and at times they will change or clarify or break out codes. And when they do that, we follow those codes. So they are kind of the experts in determining the class code breakouts. We're just following the guidelines that they put out. 42 states use NCCI. So if you do have business operations in other states, most likely they're using the same class codes, that we are. But, they give us the descriptions. If you look at some of these class codes, they're pages long, because they'll say it includes this, 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 and this. When you look at that little description that comes on your EAP notice or when you report payroll, that might not sound like what you do. necessarily. But if you look at the scope underneath it that we look at, that's what we use to determine, because that's just a one-line description of what you do. Sometimes it's in the actual details that determines.
Change a salesperson to an estimator.
Right.
Well, guess what? The estimator now has a higher code. So
Correct.
when I broke it down and I sent it in, they're like, oh, no, that's considered an estimator. No, it's a salesperson. So then they argued with me, not going to argue, not going to hit the button, so I went ahead and paid now the upper. So then, of course, now they went back a year, then I send them more money. So it's like, you've got to be kidding me.
Well, and for rate making purposes, it's important that employers are in the rate classification because.
Salesman and an estimator, I have salesmen. So they go out, knock, knock, knock. Hi, I'm so-and-so. Can I sell you something? They classify it as an estimator.
Yeah, and it depends, on and I'm not an expert in NCCI codes, but, what is the details as far as, estimating? Do they ever go beyond that sales to estimate a?
To do with where they're doing it.
Well, the Ohio area, yeah. In the industry.
You're knocking on my door, you're in my yard, my dogs.
No, we don't go to homes. We go to businesses.
Okay,
We go to
okay.
Seattle Police Department. Hey, we're
Yeah.
a tech company. We like to sell you a PM contract. What do you think?
Mm-hmm.
Then we come back with a price. So I guess
And-
maybe that's where they're getting the estimating. It could cost you this.
Well, and I will say that, with the audit process, there's auditors, there's a reviewer that's above them. It can be adjudicated. You can appeal your audit to go through a review process. And so there are, but, the key is getting people in the right, making sure everybody's in the right classification. Here's an example. So everybody knows those little shops that, drive-throughs. You go in, you get your beer, you get your pop, you get your lottery tickets, right? So I got a call, this was many, many years ago, from an employer that said, I think I'm misclassified. And I said, what are you classified as? Well, I'm classified as a stable. I'm like, and what do you do? I'm a drive-through. So I'm like, yeah, I think that definitely sounds like you're in the wrong classification. I went back and I pulled their original application that had been filed years prior. On their description of their pursuit of industry, they said they were a pony keg. And our underwriters looked at that, guess did not know what a pony keg was, and classified them as a stable. And, so there are times where, based on your description, maybe maybe we didn't understand, maybe you weren't descriptive enough to, put you in the wrong classifications. Or like you said, sometimes they change. Sometimes NCCI changes. But that's the first level is class code. Then we look at claims history, just like any insurance company. Obviously, claims affect your rates. I have 3 boys. My youngest son totaled 2 cars and had a speeding ticket in 6 months. What do you think happened? He actually got kicked off our policy, which probably was a good thing. But we cannot kick employers off. We're an exclusive remedy. We're a state agency, so we have to insure you. But claims history obviously is a part of that. And payroll is a measure of exposure. So you could be a very small company that has 10 employees, but they might work 2 hours a week. Or you might have 10 employees that work 60 hours a week. So payroll is the best measure of exposure. So those are kind of the initial basics of rate making. And then we have a 4-year experience period. My car insurance, I've already checked into it, they're 3 years. Ours is 4 years. For private employers, public employers, it's a little bit of a different policy year. For public employers, we use calendar year. For private employers, we use 7/1 to 6/30. We take a snapshot and we use that claims history. We don't immediately put that claim that you had into your rate calculation. You can see here, beginning for policy year 1/1 of 2023, we looked at claims that happened 17, 18, 19, and 20. For private, same policy with the private employers. Each year, 1 year rolls off, and then we pick up a new year. But you can see there's a little bit of a lag. When we look at the claims cost, and this is what we look at in that period of time, we look at claims costs that occurred during that year. We don't look at frequency. If you had a $10,000 loss, that could be one claim that cost $10,000. It could be 10 claims that each cost $1,000. We're looking at the total loss. I've had employers come to me and say, we've been in business 50 years, never had a claim, and my rates go up because I had one claim. Well, we don't go back and look 50 years. We only look at the 4-year period, and that rolls. The reason we don't use the most recent is that part of that calculation of claims cost is the medical expenses, the compensation expenses, and a reserve. The reserve is our crystal ball that tries to predict the future cost of that claim. There's no insurance company that has a perfect crystal ball. They all use some type of reserve system. We have a program called ACEs that is a modeling system that looks at different elements within a claim, diagnosis, age of the injured worker, things that are cost drivers, but that gives us a prediction of our future cost of that claim. But any claim initially, the reserves tend to be high because there's activity. Even a medical-only claim, you have activity, then it stops. What we're trying to do to have that little period we call the green year is to let those reserves stabilize so that they are a good predictor of the claim. The downside to that is that claims decisions are made immediately within a claim, as in real time, as things are happening. Things that decisions you make early in a claim, you might not realize what the impact 2 years when it starts to affect your rates. So kind of keep that in mind. It's always that 4-year rolling period. And to simplify it, it's a mathematical calculation. But to simplify it, we look at what we expect you to lose based on your payroll, your claims history, and your classification. And we look at we look at what we expect you to lose versus your actual losses. If your actual losses are less than what we expect you to lose, you have a credit or a discount on your premium. If your claims costs are higher than that expected losses, then you are debit rated or penalty rated. So you'll pay a higher premium than the average employer in your industry. So that's what we call an experience modifier calculation that employers go through each year, state-funded employers. What happens sometimes is that each year the rates can change based on how much you saw our claims costs have been going down, our claims numbers have been going down. And there's times where you could have one claim that's maybe in your experience, so your actual losses might stay pretty constant as that 4 years rolls on, but that what we expect you to lose could go down, it could go up. So your experience modifier can fluctuate a little bit based on what everybody else is doing. The good news is when the expected losses are going down, our rates in general are going down. So what you might see in that case, you might see your rates stay kind of the same or relatively stable, but that experience modifier might look to go up. But again, that experience modifier is always just comparing you to the average and trying to make those calculations, trying to predict that future. And sometimes you're trying to predict claims that are happening in the future when you're trying to do estimates and things along those lines. The good news is our rates have been falling pretty significantly. For private employers since 2011, 62% our rates have been going down. And if you think about what I talked about earlier, what puts pressure on our rates, medical inflation, medical costs, the cost of that x-ray, that MRI, that surgery, those are going up. Wages is the other piece, those are going up, but our rates are falling. We are the 5th lowest workers' compensation rates in the country, according to the Oregon study. The state of Oregon does a study every 2 years of workers' compensation rates. One time we were the third highest. That was back in the early 2000s. Now we're the fifth lowest, so we're kind of in line with where we want to be. That helps too with economic development. When employers are looking to come into the state and start up business, they're looking at many different factors, and some of that includes, workers' compensation rates. So those are all good news. Any questions regarding that? I'm going to switch gears a little bit. All right, so let's talk about different programs and grants that employers are eligible. If you are a state-funded employer, then you qualify for these grants and programs that I'm talking about. Are there any self-insured employers in the room? All right, so I'm talking to the entire room. So by being a state-funded employer, you qualify for these. You must be reporting payroll to BWC. That sounds like intuitive, but some employers do not report payroll to BWC. Sometimes they're part of an employer, a PEO, which is a private employer organization where they pay payroll through that entity. Sometimes an example of a zero reporting payroll might be a sole proprietor. They're not required to cover themselves, but they might want to have a policy with zero payroll. But if they have employees, they have to cover. So reporting payroll to BWC, and then in good standing. What we mean in good standing is that you're current on your premiums. So some employers will pay us monthly, some will pay us quarterly, once a year, but you're current on your premium payments regardless, of what your installment schedule might look like. And that if you have lapsed or if you have neglected to pay us, that lapse isn't any more than 40 days in the last 12 months. So that's just generally speaking, you have to be in good standing with BWC to take advantage of these programs. So the first two programs are group programs, group experience rating, group retrospective rating. This is something employers should look at every year if you're state funded. What program makes the most sense for me? The group experience rating is a program where a sponsoring organization, like a chamber, trade association, Better Business Bureau, they'll put together a group and they'll submit to us a roster. When I talked about before that experience modifier calculation, where we compare the actual losses to your actual losses to what we would predict, what group experience rating does is take that roster of employers and they act as one large employer as opposed to, 100, 200, 300 small employers. And the goal with that is that your experience modifier would be less as a group than it would be on your own. So most of the time, I don't want to speak for the groups, they do their own underwriting, but most of the time they would want you to be credit rated to be in that group. If you're debit rated, then you could be pulling that group down. So generally speaking, that's what they look for, is credit rated employers. And your goal is that my individual experience modifier might be 0.95, but the group can get me a 0.76. So 1 is average, anything less than 1 is those credit rated. Group retrospective rating, it has the word group in it, but the program op's totally different. What's similar is the same sponsoring organizations will put together a roster, submit it to BWC, but every employer in that group pays their own individual premium based on your own individual experience modifier. What happens at the 1 year after the end of the policy year is that BWC will look at that group premium and it will look at all the claims that occurred during that year from that entire group. If we collected too much premium based on their history, then you get a credit back. If there is some risk that the premium collected was not enough and there could be an assessment. Most of these group retro programs have generated credits. Obviously, these sponsoring organizations don't want to be in a situation where their employers get a bill instead of a credit. So they're pretty particular about using their own underwriting criteria to make those determinations and invite those individuals into the group. And the credit comes directly back from BWC. Let's say you were part of a group and your premium comprised of 2% of the entire group premium, your rebate would be 2% of whatever that would be. And that calculation is done for 3 years, 1, 2, and 3 years after the end. So those programs are two of our popular programs. Again, they're underwritten by the groups, so if you're interested in those, you're probably talking to the third-party administrator who is representing the group and underwriting those programs. The next two programs I'll kind of talk about together because I think most people understand the concept of a deductible program. I certainly do in my auto insurance. Do I have a $250 deductible? Do I have a $1,000 deductible? Do I have a $2,000 deductible? And when you pick a smaller deductible, your premium is a little bit higher. If you choose a very large deductible, like a $2,000 on your car insurance, then your premium, you have some more upfront savings. But your risk, just like in car insurance, is that you could have what happened to me with my son. Total 2 cars in 6 months. And I had to pay that deductible out twice on both times. So the same is with our deductible program. Individual retro operates similar. What the difference is, and I'm not going to get into the detail, but it's just the mechanics of how things are paid. Deductible gets bills once a month. We bill individual retro, once a year. So there's a little bit different in the mechanics. But your deductibles can be as low as like $500, and it can be as high in individual retro as $400,000. So individual retros for the very large employers. Large and small deductible, is probably more the medium or small employers. And we also have what we call a one claim program. If you did have that one claim that removed you from a group rating program, getting a substantial discount, we have a program that kind of buffers that and has to do a few activities. But what that program's kind of designed is that big premium swing. If you were in a group rating program, you can get up to 53% of your discount on your premium, and then your premium swings in the other directions. So these are all things that you should look at on a yearly basis. Once you decide what program you're in, you can look at some of our other programs like transitional work, drug-free, early payment, and safety council to see if any of these other programs are compatible and where you can potentially get some rebates back for participating. I think all of you understand safety council. Get up to a 3% rebate, up to $5,000 for participating in the meetings like such today. What we find historically is employers participating in safety council, they're kind of in tune with all the safe work practices, they're networking with other employers, and they have safer operations. Early payment discount, you can get 2% of your premium back if you pay us all up front. That prevents us from having to send you monthly, quarterly bills, collecting payments, potentially lapsing. So there's some incentive for employers to pay your premium all up front at the beginning of the policy year. Drug-free safety program, obviously, drugs have an impact on the workforce. I think you'll learn a little bit more about that next month, according to Julia. And so you can participate in our program to have a drug-free safety program that helps incentivize you to have drug-free workplace programs and prevent, have a safer workplace. Transitional work bonus. Transitional work, if you've had claims, is the biggest bang for your buck. Keep them out of our system. Keep them engaged. Keep them off that temporary total compensation. Find things for them to do. Most employees, when they're injured, they just worry about where their paycheck's coming from. They don't want to spend a lot of time off work. Now, we all hear horror stories that kind of can go to the opposite direction, but having them engaged and working is part of their rehab, part of their physical therapy. And again, some of these medical onlys, you'll never need transitional work, but if you have a lost time claim, that can linger on for months, years, decades sometimes, that bringing them back to work and keeping them employed is a benefit. So I talked a lot about programs. I want to give you a resource of people you can go to help you. On our website, if you have access to the website, you can pull up your My Policy page and pull up that right underneath your company information is the BWC account rep. I represent a smaller group of large employers, so most likely my name will not appear there, but it could. but you have an employer service specialist who helps every employer. Every employer is assigned employer service specialist, that they can help you look at some of these programs and rebates and making sure that you're maximizing your potential with BWC, minimizing your premium and taking advantage. So I encourage you, if you don't know who that person is, to go on and find out. Next topic I wanted to talk about is our substance use recovery and workplace safety program. And Will, if I can put you to work and have you pass out flyers, I think some picked this up. But this is a great program to take advantage of. Any state fund employer can take advantage of this program. You do not have to be in our drug-free workplace program. We will reimburse for policy development and legal review of your policy up to $2,000 annually. Now, everybody knows what happened in November, correct? You'll learn about that, I think, more next month. But does your policy address that? So it's a good time to have your policy reviewed, either by a policy developer or a legal counsel. $2,000 a year is available for policy development and legal review of your substance use policy. This is the perfect time to take advantage of that, to update your policy, to say what you want it to say, especially in regards to that. Employee education, supervisor training, again on substance use issues. It's important that your employees know what your drug-free workplace program policy says. What are the consequences of the violation? So there's trainers that hold credentials, substance abuse professionals that can come out and do your employee education. Many employers do their trainings themselves, and I think that's great for a lot of topics, lockout, tagout, other topics along those lines. But bringing somebody in who's an expert in the field, we will reimburse up to $5,000 a year for that training for your employees. They are in tune with what's happening out there in regards to drugs and alcohol, what different mechanisms are out there to mask. They help educate employees on all of that, not in a negative way, but also with supervisors. They're teaching supervisors skills on what to look for as far as reasonable suspicion, how to approach somebody, how to send them to treatment. If you think somebody's under the influence, you don't want to tell them to drive to XYZ testing site to get their drug test. Obviously, you're going to want to take them. They need to be trained on that, know how to document it, and so supervisors can go through a separate training. So we'll reimburse for that for $5,000 each year with this program. With Michelle.
How exactly does the employer get the reimbursement?
So what they will do, and my contact is the best contact for this, they can go to that on our website. They have to submit their invoices and proof of payment for all of those. Supervisor training, in addition to invoice proofs of payment, we ask for the curriculum and their sign-in sheets or proof of attendance, might be a certificate, etc. Some employers will use a train-the-trainer option with this, where they train somebody internally. They go through an extensive training to be able to provide that training to their employees. You see that a lot with construction, where you might have people kind of in and out, and it's hard to bring people back. People that do field work, HVAC, they're out in the field most of the time. That is also reimbursed under the program. We will also reimburse for drug testing up to $1,500 a year. Drug testing, in order to qualify for that, you must have a second chance as part of your drug policy. So we'll ask in that case to see your drug policy to verify that you offer a second chance. You do not have to offer a second chance to everybody. We understand how it works in the real world. You might have CDL license employees where if they do not have their CDL license, they cannot drive a truck for you. So, that might be a case where you would terminate. It might be a situation where somebody's on probation and maybe they just started and been there 10 days and 8 days they've been late, and then you send them for a drug test and they turn out positive. That might be, anytime you terminate, we suggest you talk to legal counsel to make sure we're not going to help you out of that situation, but making sure that you're doing things that are in accordance with your policy and other laws that might impact termination. But if you have some language that you may offer a second chance in your policy, and we look for the word may, doesn't have to say must, but that's what we look for to see if you're eligible. So $1,500 a year. For some employers, that's their entire drug testing that they do in a given year. Drug tests are anywhere from like $40 to $100, and is what we've been seeing. Yes?
Is this in addition to the annual report that we have?
So you're talking about you're in the drug-free workplace, drug-free safety program. Yes. So any employer in our drug-free safety program should be doing this as well, because we're basically reimbursing you for what's required as part of the other program. Yes, it is separate reporting. Yes. And your reports are due the end of March. We're going to be having webinars that you'll be invited to around probably the beginning of March, because you have all your paperwork and stuff out for that. So it's a good time to tap into.
Does the also include pre-employment?
Pre-employment, post-accident, reasonable suspicion. Yes, yes. So, it's a great program. The invoices have to be 1 year from the date of service, so you can go back up to 1 year. They have to be itemized. So what we see in regards to this a lot of times is with pre-employment, sometimes they'll bundle an expense that's your pre-employment drug screen, your background check, and your physical. If it's bundled like that, we won't pay for it because the drug test is not line item. So, so we don't pay for those bundled expense, but if it's just a line item for a drug test, we will reimburse for that. So it's a great opportunity. Again, with this area changing on a daily basis, I really suggest that every employer take advantage of that. If nothing else, the policy development and legal review right now, I think it's critical.
So we could go ahead and have legal review now?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Before
Yep.
March?
Yep, you can have it done at any time. And again, as long as it's submitted with, there's a form that you fill out with the program and to submit. But I'm your contact for that, so my contact will be at the end. So feel free to contact me directly and I'll walk you through it. Yes?
Understand, obviously, my firm drafts these policies
Mhm.
all the time for our clients, but are you saying that even if we've done that within the past year, they can submit our bill for payment?
Correct. Yes. Yep, up to $2,000. So it's important that your policy be well-written. We encourage that legal review, because you might have other policies that kind of butt up against your workers' comp policy that we're not looking at. That's why we don't put out sample policies. You might have an accident reporting policy, and that butts up against your drug testing policy, because if you have an accident and you do post-accident drug testing, you want those policies to say the same thing. So
does our consulting firm that we have, do we go through them to look at our policy, or?
there are policy developers outside of legal counsel. We do have a list on our website under our drug-free vendor program, but it either has to be a legal counsel or somebody certified in policy development. There's other, multiple companies that could be under that. Yes?
Just to clarify, we don't have to be part of the drug-free workplace.
Correct.
In order to do this.
Yes, and that's very important distinction. Any state-funded employer, and I think there's a lot of misconception when we rolled this out that I'm not part of that program. Maybe you're in group retro and they're not compatible with drug-free, but this applies to any state-funded employer. Yes?
When was this put into effect?
2018, 2019. Montgomery County was actually part of a pilot program initially when we rolled it out, working with the local ADAM-H boards. What we found statewide was not all the ADAM-H boards were wanting to participate, so BWC, since we were funding the program, just took it over, with BWC administering it. So great time to take advantage. We have a program called Better You, Better Ohio. If you don't have a wellness program in place, your employees can get incentives for participating in health risk assessment and biometric screening. So if you already have a wellness program in place that has this involved, then your employees don't qualify. They can also earn some money. This, again, doesn't go back to the employer. This goes to the employee, all of this, where they can earn some incentives for coaching calls or physical activity. You do have to be in one of these industries to qualify. I always joke that your insurance agent or your banker doesn't qualify, but most industries that especially have some risk involved are included. If you don't know if you fit into this box of one of these, call me again at the end, because we try to be pretty liberal in construing these industries, because we want employees to take advantage of this if they're eligible. Wellness has a very important part of workers' compensation and how long a person is off. If you have a person that is obese, they might have to delay surgery until they can lose 50 pounds if they have to have a total knee replacement. So all of wellness has a very direct impact on workers' compensation. We also have some grants available. Will comes and talks to you a lot about these, but we do have transitional work grants available, our safety intervention grants, our firefighter grants, school safety and security, school HVAC, trench, and body armor grants for police officers. I'm not going to go into all of the details, but I will kind of highlight this because I think this one is somewhat underutilized. The transitional work grant program will help you develop that transitional work program. Transitional work, once the horse is out of the barn and you have a claim, transitional work is the best cost control strategy, bringing them individuals back to work. So we have grants available to help you develop a policy. These job analysis are job descriptions, and they're not an HR job description, they're the physical requirements of a particular job. So they are written by physical therapists and occupational therapists. That's all paid for out part of the program. The reimbursement depends on the number of employees that you have. If you have not had this program in the last 5 years, you're eligible. We recognize your workforce changes a little bit, your processes change, you might automate certain processes over the years, but this is a program that I think is underutilized. I think Will comes out and talks about safety intervention grants on a regular basis, that $40,000 that's available. A lot of these are ergonomic fixes that we've reimbursed for, but you can also be creative. If you have a process that's causing a lot of injury, call Will and his team to come out and maybe do some consultation. We have some firefighter grants that are for equipment that's specialized with firefighters, school safety and security that related to school, and HVAC. This came about as part of COVID, trying to get all of the HVAC systems that are circulating air on a effective basis that are help preventing some of those injuries. Trench safety, trench collapse are a big target for OSHA, so we have some money available to help with that shoring and shielding equipment. Body armor grant, we had a number of years ago discovered that a lot of the police officers' body armor was outdated or non-existent. So there's money available. Will talks on a regular basis about all of his services that can come about as part of the safety consultants. Will is a general safety consultant, so he can help with walkthroughs and hazard assessment program reviews. But we do have specialists in industrial hygiene that does the air and noise sampling. We have ergonomists that helps with work design, lifting, to prevent some of those repetitive motion issues. We have an extensive library service that you can tap into and utilize if you're trying to do some research and some fixes within your work environment. And as Will mentioned, webinars, online training courses, those are all things that are free or prepaid as part of your premium. And just lastly, I think Will's talked about this maybe in the past too, just a plug for Dolly Parton's Imagination Library. This is something we realize that younger kids and literacy is struggling. And the governor's office, the First Lady is very passionate about it, but children 0 to 5 can get free books with part of this program. And if you're interested, here's a QR code. I wish this program was available when my kids were young. My kids are 25, 23, and 21. So I really wish this was available back then. But it's a great way to get kids engaged in reading. So not related to BWC, but I thought it was an important plug to give. A lot of information, a lot of questions. Any questions at this point? I know it's 9:31. Yes?
If we have a transitional work program in place, how often do you suggest reviewing that?
Well, you're qualified for the grant every 5 years. So I would say at least every 5 years it wouldn't hurt to take advantage of the grant. But if you feel like it has changed, then definitely I think you could have it reviewed. Of course, you couldn't use the grant if it was more recent than that. What we used to see with this program, the grant program's been out there since like 2000. And what we find is when we started recently talking to employers about grant that they got a while ago, they don't even know where that book is and the procedure book and the dusted off the shelf. So, it's kind of as needed, but I would say at minimum every 5 years.